I'm Cheryl Welcher. I'm on the board of the Westborough Historical Society and welcome you here tonight to our program. The Historical Society was founded in 1889. Probably most of you know that. Our mission is to preserve local history through the preservation of artifacts and research. Who doesn't know this? Our headquarters is the Sibley House next door on Parkman Street. We do invite you to come for a tour whenever you can. Before we get going with our program tonight, there's a couple events coming up that I'd like to talk to you about. As part of Kindness Week, we have a downtown walking tour on Wednesday, November 13th. Meet at 3:30 at the Sibley House. Chris Allen is going to be leading the tour.
It's just a loop. It's a loop from here, Parkman Street, Grove, up Church, down a little bit of Ruggles, and then West Main. But what we're going to do is we're going to stop at the homes of famous people, like John Ruggles, who is the father of the modern patent office, like Esther Forbes and Harriet Forbes. Esther wrote Johnny Tremaine, and Annie Fales, for instance. So we're stopping at different houses of famous people. We're inviting families, and little kids get chalk so they can write on the sidewalk in front of the famous people's houses some encouraging things. So it's basically a loop. It'll take about an hour. It's very leisurely, no problems. Wonderful. So we hope you can come.
Thank you. Always a good time. On Saturday, November 16th from 2 to 4, we're going to have an open house at the Sibley House. We're going to be celebrating veterans. We'll have a special exhibit of artifacts from wars that our country's been involved in through the centuries. So, what else do we have? Tonight's speaker, Seema Jane Kenney, began exploring her family history when she was in high school. Wonderful, I'm reading here. Her paternal family roots go deep into colonial New England, especially Massachusetts, Maine, and Connecticut. Her European roots include English, German, Swedish, and most recently the Netherlands. Seema began in the business of genealogy after completing the Genealogical Research Certificate at BU. Since then, she's continued her education after completing the the ProGen and NIGR in 2012. Seema has a BA and a BS in Management Information Systems and Business Administration. There are more than 26 topics in genealogy that Seema has done research on, from an introduction, specific types of repository, working with DNA, to writing your own autobiography. All are part of genealogical research. We hope you enjoyed tonight's program, Starting Your Family History Research. Welcome, Seema.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Historical Society for inviting me, and to the library for providing a little spot for us here, and cable. I don't know what their schedule's going to be, but you can watch the rerun on cable if you want. So you should have 4 sides, 2 pieces of paper handout from the back of the room. So you can kind of use that to follow along, take notes if you want, but whatever. I like to kind of avoid having too many people heads down writing while we're talking. So I have been doing this a very long time. My grandmother is one of 8 children. By the time I came along and we were visiting my great-grandparents, who were alive until I was about 10, 5 or 6 of her siblings all still lived in the area, had their own kids, who then had their own kids, and we would all show up, and great-grandma was always telling me, no, that's your cousin, no, that's your cousin. So that's how I got into genealogy, because I never knew who the heck these cousins were, where they all come from. My mother's only a one child, like how can I have all these cousins? So this is for starting your genealogy, but have any of you already started? I know one of you has. Okay, so, all right, we'll talk some basics, and feel free to ask a few more advanced questions and things as we go along. So basically, I want to talk to you about a couple of genealogical forms. If you've already started, you should be familiar with pedigree charts and family group sheets. And then we'll look into doing some research. Where can I look? What can I find? Where might I tell you can look that you didn't know about? And I always like to include something on education, because genealogy is the kind of field where you don't know what you're going to need to know next week. So it's very hard to say, yes, I need to go to a class when you don't know until 2 in the morning, oh my gosh, I've got an ancestor in Kansas. And we're in New England, there aren't too many classes on how to do genealogy in Kansas, so we'll talk about some of the ways you can enhance your education, and I got lots of tips for you on different places depending on what kind of situations you're going involved in. As I've already given to a few of you ideas about what we're doing. So genealogy is the study of families. It's the study of connections within the family. You can define that however you want. It doesn't matter if it's biological versus a mixed family or intergenerational, whatever. But we're going to study their relationships, whether those, again, biological or just familial, because that's who you always called mom, then she's your mom. That's what matters, right? If you go far enough, and certainly as you go back far in New England, it becomes the study of a town. Because I know when I started going back on my paternal grandmother's side, I got back to what was originally, well, it wasn't originally called Lancaster, but it's the area that is now Lancaster, Massachusetts. It was so large back then that it's now parts of 13 different towns. But when it started, and there were only, maybe a dozen families that moved there when they started it, yes, they all had a dozen or more children, but who did they all marry? The other families. So by the time the United States came along and was doing the 1790 census, I looked one time. I'm related to about 55% of the people on the 1790 census for the part of Lancaster that it's now actually Bolton, where my ancestors lived. I'm related to almost everybody because they all intermarried. Well, who else are you going to marry, right? The boy next door, the girl next door, because you didn't have a lot of choices. So it does become a study of communities, especially if you've got a nice tight-knit community where a neighborhood even, where your ancestors lived, and you need to know something about those neighbors and things, not just your own ancestors, in order to understand their lives. Now, I'm big on doing my research and learning about their lives. Other people like to just get names and dates, and they want to fill up the walls with names and dates. I have no problems if that's what you want to do, but I'm telling you outright, I want the stories. I want to know what happened between the dates, right? And how did they live, and what was life like? Did they have cars yet? Did they just use trains? Did they use horses? Whatever. All right, so there's lots of reasons to start genealogy, right? I started because I had all these cousins at great-grandma's house I couldn't keep straight. I've got my grandson trained now. I couldn't believe he said this to me this weekend. We were coming down the stairs. That's Nana when she was little. He knows now that that picture over the stairway, that's Nana when she was 2 years old. I don't look anything like I did when I was 2. Does that shock you? So, sometimes it's just, oh yeah, there was that old picture. I never knew why it was there, but I had to dust it once a week, and maybe I should figure out who it is that I was dusting all those years, whatever. There are a ton of reasons. Certainly, there are a lot of people adopted that are doing it strictly because they need medical information, right? Those silly forms at the doctors that go on for check boxes after check boxes after check boxes. Do you have any of this in your family, right? Some of them are pretty important to know if you have it in your family. And that's okay. And if that's what your focus is, then hey, names and dates and causes of deaths are fine. You collect all of them you need because that's your focus. Maybe when you get it all, then you'll come back and do stories and other things, It's all dependent on what you want to do. And if you haven't started yet, or even if you have started but you kind of got overwhelmed, don't hesitate to put a fence around yourself and say, I am only interested in direct ancestors. I'm only interested in mom's side of the family. Because it's very easy to be sitting there at the computer and you're following these hints, right? And before you know it, you're on, this is great-grandma's brother-in-law's mother-in-law, and you finally are like, why? Do I really care? Great-grandma's brother-in-law's? No! Come back to what you care about. I'm not saying you should just ignore those hints forever. Someday you might need to know about great-grandma's brother-in-law's mother-in-law or whatever. But start with what you want to know and keep yourself focused on that, because that's how you're going to feel that you've made progress and you're going to feel good about what you're doing. Don't worry about all that clutter that's out there, because, you know, it's like the election. You look at what you want to look at and forget all the other advertisements, right? Don't all of us wish we could go vote in New Hampshire after all the freaking ads we've watched? Like, why do we have to watch them all? All right, so a pedigree chart. You've probably done one of these if you have, even if you've never done genealogy, because they're in your baby books. They're in school assignments, right? So a pedigree starts with what I've decided to call the focus person, right? And you have a copy of this in your handout. And if you need more copies of the 2 forms we're going to talk about, you can get them off of my website, as well as 100 other places on the internet if you need to download fresh copies. So I just say focus person because this could be anybody, right? You could be doing your own genealogy, you could be doing a spouse's, you could be doing a grandchild's or a child's genealogy. On the pedigree chart, the next thing you're going to enter in is their mom and dad. Whoever the focus person is, you're going to enter mom and dad. And then you're going to enter grandmas and grandpas. And hopefully you've got 4 names. And then you're going to go to great-grandparents. And maybe you have 8 names, or maybe you have a few less. It doesn't really matter. You enter what you know. How you know it is a different question, but you enter what you know, right? You probably know your own name, and hopefully you know your parents' names. Although certainly I've met plenty of people who don't know their biological parents' names, and that's okay too. Now, on a pedigree chart, usually you're going to see these letters B, M, and D, right? Birth, marriage, and death. Everybody in your family tree should have been born. We make the nasty social assumption, because it's not a good one these days, that everybody in your family tree got married. And we can probably pretty safely assume that there are a lot of people in your family tree who have died, right? And if they haven't yet, they will eventually. It's kind of a given. There's little things all over the floor here. So when we enter birth, marriage, and death, we want to enter the date and the place. So the date, it's highly recommended that you put the date in with 2 numbers for the day, spell out the month, and then 4 digits for the year. All right, so 11 is not a problem. We're in November, so the month is an 11. But if it was less than 10, I would put in like 06 or 05. And then I would, or no, sorry, that's the date. Yeah, so like today is what, the 4th, right? So I would put in 04, I would spell out November, or at least do NOV, so that, and that's to keep the month separate, it's in words, and then a 4-digit year, because that's what helps me know what century I'm looking at, right? Because I've done my genealogy in some cases back to the 1600s, and if I just put in 24, is it 2024 or is it 1624? There's a huge span there. Now, when I put in the place, I want to put in the name of the town or city, however you want to refer to it. I want to put in the county, and I want to put in the state or the territory if we're doing US genealogy, right? If we're doing other countries, we have to learn all of their definitions and divisions of land and everything to have enough. I want to put those in at the time of that event. Okay? Everybody remember when the teacher, we're all about the same age group in here, the teacher pulled down the big map, right? Because we used to have all the maps over the chalkboard for the Louisiana Purchase, and everybody in the class went, "That's not Louisiana," right? We all knew Louisiana did not go to the Canadian border. But if your ancestor was born in that territory, you want to put that they were in the Louisiana Territory when they were born, because that's going to help you to get the right history and the right historical events that were part of their life, right? And it's going to be different if they were down in New Orleans versus up at the Canadian border. you're gonna get a lot of different kinds of stories. So we wanna put it in as accurately as we can. I really need to talk to somebody down in Connecticut about who gave a presentation in 2013, that's how far back this goes. They talked about a town that has been in 4 different states. Now, nobody picked up the town and moved it, okay? But the borders moved. The county borders move. So that's why we want to get the right information for the time, because when you go to look for a county record, you got to look in the right county. You have to look in the right state, right? This sounds crazy, but for a genealogist, it won't. It's like as recent as like the 1930s that Massachusetts and Rhode Island settled the border between them. It's not that far back. And that's a local border. So, you know, New England's been here the longest. What about some of these other places that have had territories and had to be turned into states and things? When did they create their borders? This is the history that you need to learn as you figure out where you're going to research. Now, there's a couple other things about this pedigree chart. Yes, I used pink and blue on purpose, even though I know, as my daughter-in-law is teaching her children, colors have no owners. Colors belong to everyone. But sorry, I'm of the older generation. Pink is for girls and blue is for boys. So when you're doing a pedigree chart, and this is not necessarily because you need to understand, it's because you need to understand the scribbles you're going to find in the library. 200 years ago, just like today, 200 years ago in the 1800s, genealogy was one of the biggest hobbies. You can go to libraries and find pedigree charts that people wrote on scraps of paper in the 1800s. They're not on nice printed forms with straight lines and instructions. They're like, oh yeah, I wrote this, and you know, ask your mom or your grandma, they'll find all kinds of crazy things. So you need to understand that when you're writing in a couple, the man's name goes on the top line of the couple, the lady's name goes on the bottom. If it's numbered, now if you're doing this on a computer and some computer software, you don't have to worry about some of this because it will just do it for you. But if it's numbered, the men are going to be the even numbers. Their wife is going to be the man's number plus 1. So the wives are always going to be odd numbers. Now this is not rocket science, and if everybody was named Mary, Joseph, Susan, John, you know, it would not be a problem. What happens when you get to the name Hepzibah? Mehitabel. Does everybody know what gender those are? You know, you're going to find names, and oh my gosh, think of the genealogist 200 years from now when they start finding pedigree charts that say, oh, this person's name was Apple. And, you know, east, west, north, south, whatever these people are naming their kids these days, they're never going to have a clue what generation or what gender these people are. So does that make some sense? Yes, ma'am.
More questions?
No, please.
Oh, okay. If dad marries twice, mom dies, and there's another stepmom, how does that work in the numbering system?
She wouldn't be on this pedigree chart. This is biological.
Oh, it's only biological.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not saying the stepmom's not on a pedigree chart, but she's going to be on a different one, probably with different children.
Okay.
Right?
But they would be siblings or half siblings and
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you start with genetically hereditary connections first.
At least the ones you
Okay.
believe, yes. Because we can sometimes disprove what you believe, right? There's plenty of stories about there, my dad's not my dad, you know, and
Right.
I think most of us probably are pretty good.
So that's where you start, and then you have an add-on.
Yes,
Gotcha.
and then you've got an
Thank you.
extra chart or you've got another page. And again, if you're doing it in software, it's going to keep track of it for you. But that does make it important to say, well, wait a minute, I have to make sure I have the right person here to get my expectations met for the other generations. All right, so this is 4 generations. In 2013, I wrote my first family history book. It went back to 1640, and did not leave the shores of the United States, even though it wasn't the United States at the time, that's a lot more than 4 generations. So one of the things you're going to find on a pedigree chart is you're always going to find something, usually at the top, but wherever it fits, that says pedigree chart and it has a blank, or it says chart number. The numbering system is up to you. It can be numbers, it can be letters, it can be whatever you want, okay? But number your charts. Because it's somewhere else on your chart, there's going to be this other statement that says person 1 on this chart is the same as person blank on chart blank. And that is for this situation. When I had my grandmother here, my paternal grandmother, and I got up to her great-grandfather, I wanted to go further back, I had to take him and make him the first person on another chart. So on that chart number 2, person number 1 is the same as person 8 on chart 1. And that way, your charts are linked. Anybody who picks them up from wherever, if you're doing them on paper, again, if you're doing it on the computer, it automatically just keeps going backwards and you don't have as many issues. But if you're going to do it on paper, or even if you just print them off to take to a library or something, you want to know how your charts connect. And that's when I usually tell people, like, okay, we're at the library, so like call the library sometime and say, is the meeting room available? I just need to lay out all my my pedigree charts, you know, because none of us have floors this big at home that we could do that on. And you're gonna need a big one, because just think about it, if you fit all this on one sheet of paper, and then you're gonna have 8 more sheets of paper, and then 8 more for each of those 8, you're gonna need the whole room. All right, hopefully you get that many. Any questions on the pedigree chart before we move on?
And you don't list your siblings because...
Sometimes the gives you a place to list siblings, but usually not. Again, you can make it whatever it is you think you want to do, and there are plenty of options on the internet for companies that offer all kinds of different charts. Because obviously your chart and your full siblings chart is the same. So who's not on this chart that you would consider family? We've already talked about a few.
So any kind of step
Your siblings
or
step siblings,
Aunts and uncles.
aunts and uncles,
Children.
cousins, right? They're family, right? Isn't that who you did Easter egg hunts with and had Christmas celebrations with and everything? Okay, so the other chart is a family group chart or a family group sheet. Now this one usually just has 3 generations, but not a lot of information about the grandparents. Okay, the grandparents are kind of up there at the top, and I have a great example of this in my husband's family. He's got 4 generations of men with the same name. Well, when you're trying to keep them all straight, it helps a lot to be saying, wait, is this one the grandfather, the father, the son, the grandson? You need that little extra information on the piece of paper to kind of keep things straight. So not a lot about the grandparents, just their names. Then mom and dad, and there may be a marriage date for mom and dad or something. But predominantly, this is a list of all their children. And not just their children's names, but their birth dates. When did they get married? Who did they marry? No, I know. I have 2 daughter-in-laws. One changed her name when she got married, one did not. Right? So, but traditionally, and as we research our family backwards in time, we need to know who all those girls married in order to find them in the records, right? Because traditionally, the ladies changed their names. Maybe not so today, but traditionally, as we get into the 1800s, whatever, they've changed their names. So family group sheets come in many different varieties, depending what website you want to go download one from, or if you want to just make up your own, that's fine too. Usually they stop at 10 or 12 children per page. So if you get back to those colonials, sometimes you do need 2 pages for one family.
Ebenezer Parker and 17 children, our first minister.
There you go. I heard of somebody the other day who fathered 40 children, and I thought, good Lord.
So, on your pedigree chart, you list their birth name, not their married name, or you
Correct.
put their first name.
We're going by birth names, or
Birth
given
name.
names, yes.
So, here, when you're listing they get married, you also you're listing the spouse. Do you make any notation that the birth name has now been changed? Because sometimes when you're searching records, it's the married name that comes forward.
Right. I guess it would depend what era I'm researching. My personal philosophy has been, my parents, God bless them, maybe hanging on by a thread, but they're both still alive at 92 and 95. So I start my research with their parents and I go backwards. I think if I was coming forward, I would have a lot more issues with, well, wait a minute, who changed their name, who didn't change their name, and that kind of thing. So because I'm starting with people that are already born in the 1800s and going backwards, haven't really dealt a lot with women who didn't change their names.
I just have a grandmother who married 4 times, so
Okay.
searching for her, she outlived them all too.
Yeah.
Searching for them, I tend to search all of those names.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
you find different records under different names.
Right, absolutely.
So
yeah.
there's somewhere you
Different
just
time
make
frames.
notation
Yeah,
of the multiple marriages.
right. Absolutely. You're gonna, well, again, she probably maybe didn't have children with all 4 husbands, but
Correct.
depends how how quickly she was remarrying and whatever. So, you know, if it was the children of each marriage, you're going to have her name on maybe 2 or 3 pedigree charts. And then you may have, you know, you could certainly do 4 family group sheets, and the 4th one has no children, and that's fine, you know. So the children from any previous marriages would be stepchildren to at least one of the spouses. If you're just getting started, or if you're preparing to see your family over the upcoming holidays, and you have brick walls in your research, a family group sheet is a great way to get some help. I filled this out about Aunt Matilda the best I could. Could you add in some information? Or, I'm just getting started, you know, I'm trying to research mom and dad's family. I did these pages, but could you check over what I wrote for your family and make sure that they're right? Now, be a little careful, because when you ask that question, you just kind of open Pandora's box. You may get the pages back and only give them a copy, of course. Never give them your original, because you might not get it back. But you gave them a copy and they might end up saying, oh, you know what? I have this box of stuff from Auntie so-and-so and I really don't want it. But you're doing family history. You probably want it. And that's how you get lots of boxes in your house that you need lots of time to go through and read lots of papers. But then again, you don't know what's in those papers and maybe the answer you need is in there. But get people involved. Do the same over the holidays if you can with photographs. Photographs can have tremendous brick walls. I don't know who's in here. I don't know when it was taken. Bring some photographs and talk to your relatives and your siblings about, do you know who this is? Do you know where it was taken? Who do you think this one is? Especially if you have a wide age range where somebody will have seen relatives that maybe you don't remember ever seeing, or vice versa. Get them to help you out. It's way more fun than talking about the weather and all your latest medical ailments and aches and pains and things, right? Give them some old pictures. The kids sometimes get into it too, because they'll, what's this old picture? Who's this old guy? You know, like, that's your 3 times great-grandfather. What does that mean? Like I said, my 2.5-year-old grandson was there, and we got into this conversation like, yeah, that's daddy's, mommy's, you know, like, did not go very well. We got him very confused. So this is a family group sheet for my family. We only have 2 kids, so my sister and I only give away certain amounts of information in my presentations, but you know, so who are we? Who did we marry? Who we thought our grandparents were. Our grandparents. Those aren't quite all correct, as DNA has proven to me. But I can't tell my mother because she doesn't want to hear it. He's my father because that's the name I used my whole life. Okay, Mom. I won't tell you. So this is a simple form. It's easy to give to somebody and have them fill it out. These two forms go back hundreds of years, and you will find them at the genealogical libraries and probably in the historical society's files if they have files on local families and things. So you want to understand at least how to read them, even if you never fill one out yourself on paper. You want to understand what you're looking at. Because we have to remember that the predominance of genealogical material is not yet on the internet. It's in places like the local historical society and the local libraries and the town halls. And we have to go dig for it. And sometimes we have to educate the people who work there as to what we're looking for, why we know it's there, and give them a whole big genealogy lesson that they don't want to hear. So bring some cookies or something along with you, because they'll listen if they're eating a cookie, right? Especially a home-baked one. You know, doesn't pay, it doesn't hurt to bribe them a little bit, right? It doesn't have to be monetary. But it's about learning the records. It's not just about researching your family, it's about learning what records are available, what records were available or were created, what's available now, and who's got them. Who's storing those records? Whatever ones exist, where are they? And sometimes there's plenty of books to tell you where they are, and other times there's no book to tell you. Because you know what? Nobody knows that in that wall of the old barn, they stashed 3 years worth of newspaper clippings as insulation, and that's got the story on your ancestor. Well, you don't have to tear every barn apart. That's not part of your job. We want you to do excellent research. We want you to do thorough research, but we are not asking you to destroy something on the chance that there's something behind the wall, okay? You do the best you can within your own limitations. And we don't look for perfection, because that's never going to happen. Everybody's got some little thing in their family tree they just cannot figure out. All right, so what kind of things are we going to look for when we're researching? We're going to look for vital records, right? These happen to be, I always use my own family in my talks unless I have to have somebody else's, but these are from Maine. We've got a record of a birth, a marriage, and a death. Poor Ichabod there. Notice at the top up here, it says this is a copy of an old record. I love these people dearly who copied the old records because the records were deteriorating because of the paper they were on, or you know, how they were stored or whatever. But I would bet you there weren't this many blanks on his original death certificate. And I would love that information about poor old Ichabod. I have to settle for what she copied, right? The person who copied it, they gave me the name, they gave me the date of death. I can't do any better than that because obviously the old record has been destroyed. Otherwise there wouldn't be a copy of it. So sometimes we have to settle for what we can get. Every state has a different format for their birth, marriage, and death records, so don't expect them all to look the same state to state. And this will be one of my first little research hints here. When you do find that place that you've never researched before, if it's a new state in the United States, a state that you have not researched in, go to the state website and find the area for the Secretary of State. For instance, for Kansas, because I don't know why, but many years ago I went looking for the Secretary of State's page for Kansas to look something up. That is where you will find out, and I'll tell you right now, in Kansas, they didn't start collecting birth certificates till 1906. And I went, huh? I just looked at some for the 1700s in Massachusetts. What do you mean I gotta wait till the 1900s in Kansas? You need to know that. Don't go looking for a record that never existed. If the state wasn't requiring it, there probably is not a governmental record. It doesn't mean you can't find the date of birth or something close to the date of birth, but we got to define what haystack are we going to look in, what haystack might have that needle we're looking for, because otherwise we're going to look in a lot of haystacks and find nothing. And that's just not energizing and fulfilling. So we're going to look for these kind of documents. We might be looking for naturalization papers. We might be lucky enough, ask a bunch of cousins, do you happen to have the family Bible? There's usually only maybe 2 to 4 pages in a family Bible that you really want. They should be able to copy them for you. I found my great-grandparents' Swedish family Bible. It is this thick. It's so thick it has hinges to keep the cover closed. Yep, the only family information is who gave it to the bride and groom. Has the names of the bride and the groom and the people who gave it to them. I really don't need the whole freaking Bible. Except that it's a beautiful book, but it's all in Swedish. I can't read it anyway.
Seema, where would you find naturalization papers?
If it's after 1906, naturalization papers will be at the National Archives. If it's before 1906, you got a lot more work to do. 1906 is when the federal government took over doing naturalizations. So before that, they were done by the state. So you have to know a lot more about where they lived, where the courts were, in order to figure out. Now, you may luck out because a lot of those were given to the National Archives, because let's face it, we all know from our own life experience, we can't store everything we wanted to store from the day we were born. The state can't store every single copy of any paper that was created. So when the federal government gave them a chance to say, send us your stuff, there are some states who said, you can have my stuff, right? Because they knew it was still going to be kept. Right? The National Archives, there's 13 of them around the United States. They have, I can't even imagine how many tons of paper that they take care of. So, you know, it's just making sure it was taken care of properly and stored properly.
So if it was Massachusetts, it's go to the state courts. Or...
If it's Massachusetts before 1906, it would have been done at a court. And this is where it gets tricky. I have a whole nother presentation on naturalization, so I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole. But yes, you have to learn about the courts, and then you have to find, well, which one was closest to where my ancestors lived?
Okay.
Because it might have been in New York or another state. Yes?
So is it about where they landed or where they moved to? Like they might come into New York, the port of New York, but they immediately went to New Haven for their family.
It would be where they were living after they fulfilled the residency requirement for naturalization.
Ah, okay.
You had to live in the country for a certain amount of time. You had to live in that state for a certain amount of time. The state was usually shorter. So it might have been like you'd have to live in the United States for 5 years, but you only had to be in Connecticut for 2 years and you could go to the court.
Okay.
So, yeah, like I said, we won't
And
go
is
down
that
the...
county court you're talking about? Or is it some sort of state?
If it's before 1906, the
Yeah.
court is defined as any entity that keeps records, has a seal, and a clerk.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I said, you gotta learn. I think it was 1932 that there was a governmental report that said there were over 5,000 courts that were eligible to do naturalizations prior to 1906.
I believe it.
You gotta do a lot of research. Well, you don't have to do a lot. Go on to Ancestry, look at the red book. It has all the information you need. Yes?
I just had a question about, you're showing us 3 records on a person, and you can enter a lot of that information into some kind of a digital record, but I find it's really nice to have that snapshot, that PDF of that document, because it's a piece of history, really.
Well, and it's your proof.
And
You
so
know,
how do I store all of that? Because it's starting to get complicated. Do you relate it back to the number, like the person and the number, and you create a file for them?
So like how
digitally?
would you digitally store it? Is that what you want to know?
Yes.
Okay. I am never going to claim to be one of those, like, I'll organize your house or teach you to organize. I believe organization is a personal thing. If you stop and thought about, if I was putting this in paper in a file cabinet, how would I store it? Right? And I used to teach Windows way, way back when everybody was like, I don't know what to do with this computer. Think of your computer as a filing cabinet, right? You can create a folder, which is the equivalent of a drawer. You can put folders in it, which is the equivalent of those green hanging folders. Well, now they come in rainbow colors. You can then have a folder inside of that, which would be your manila folder, and you can have papers inside of that. So how would you do it physically if you printed all those pages and you had to organize them and just do the same thing on your computer? Because the biggest part of organizing is so when you find out that you and I are cousins, and I say, oh, we are? Do you have great-great-great-great-grandma's this or that? You need to be able to find whether you have it. I can't tell you how you're going to go look it up in your files, but you know how you're going to look it up.
And you should just do the same for every person in your
And do the
chart.
same, yeah.
And feel those folders.
Best
that
as
they
you
have.
can. Okay, because now Chris and I, you can't do the same with Swedish records as you can with American records. Okay? The Norwegian countries, they use patronymic naming. So mother, father, son, and daughter all have a different last name.
Daughter Mills Nilsson was.
There's no making a file that says the Smith family. My husband learned very quickly when we were in Sweden earlier this year, don't even look in the cemeteries, because I know you're going to find an Anderson, but it ain't going to be my Anderson. And he found Swenson's, and he found all the, none of them were going to be mine. 2 reasons: patronymic naming, and they reused the graves after 25 years.
Wow.
My ancestors left there in the 1800s. I don't think any of them have paid for grave maintenance that, would keep them in the same grave. Plus, most of them died in a poorhouse. They probably never had a cemetery plot. So, so yes, within the confines of the ethnicity you're dealing with, how would you organize it on paper and do that on the computer? It doesn't matter that your kids might not ever be able to understand, eventually they'll figure out your system. But it doesn't have to be the same system that everybody else is using. And I won't tell you, there are plenty of people out there who will tell you, oh, this is my system and it works great. Yeah, because it's your system and you're using it. I used to tell my husband when my mother-in-law was coming over for dinner, I'm like, please, keep her out of the kitchen. I don't want her putting things away in the drawers because I can never find them, right? Love the woman to death. I miss her dearly. She's been gone a long time, but she always put things in the opposite drawer that I would put them in, and it's like, I can't find anything after she leaves, right? She had a different organization system than I did, and that's okay. I learned hers when I was at her house. She was expected to learn mine. No. I was expecting she would learn mine at my house if she's going to put my dishes away. All right, so here's a family Bible page that one of my cousins had. It looks even prettier in color. If I can ever find the original again, I have to rescan it. Does this look like handwriting to you? Looks like a printer's job to me. This looks like handwriting. All right. This is actually in different colors and different pens and different types of pens and things. That's a clue that they were contemporarily to the event. This person was born in 1789. This one's not born until 1833, and they all look exactly the same printing. No, little suspicious. I'll take this, it's genealogical gold, but I still want to find the documents that prove that these are the correct dates, okay? When we look at a document, we have to stop and think about, well, who would have written this? Like, we know that different people wrote these death dates, but we also know it wasn't this person up here, Peter, who wrote his own death date, right? That would be impossible. So who gave the information? How well did they really know the information? And on top of that, now this is a family Bible, so it wouldn't apply, but if it's a government document, what were the rules about that information? There are plenty of places, and if you've never listened to her, I highly recommend you listen to Judy Russell, the legal genealogist, and she'll give you the same spiel in every single talk. You have to know the law at the time the document was created. If your farmer ancestor, because we're in New England, we've all got farmers somewhere in our backgrounds here. If they got to the town clerk to register their children's birth, right? You might think it was probably the father, because the mother might have been a little busy with the 10 kids at home, whatever, right? Well, if it said you must register within 30 days and he gets there on day 33, is he going to pay the fine for being late, or is he going to fake the date? We don't want to think that our ancestors lied, but there are times when they did for very legitimate reasons. He probably didn't have the nickel in his pocket to pay the fine. So we've got to know those rules so that when we find another document that has a different date, we know which one to believe and why we believe it. All right, so what else are we going to look for? I love to add photographs, right? It makes everybody feel, nobody wants to pick up a book and read it if it's 100% text and doesn't have any pictures in it, right? I'll settle for even little squiggly doodads at the top of each chapter. It's more interesting than straight out text for hundreds of pages. I want to look for newspaper articles. Let's look for those those funeral cards, the obituaries in the newspaper, right? All these things have lots and lots of clues for us. Even if they don't have the fact we want at the time, they have more clues. And don't forget, when you're writing your family history, write your own stories about the ancestors that you did know. What did you think of Grandma? And maybe put in there, when I was 7, Grandma seemed to be the tallest person in the world. Yeah, well, by the time you were 27, she probably didn't seem so tall anymore. But, when you're this tall, everybody feels tall. So give a little perspective, Abe Lincoln was tall for everybody, but not everybody's that tall. But put your own stories in, because that's what's going to make it personal for people.
Excuse me, Seema.
Yeah.
What's a funeral card?
The ones you get at the mortuary.
Prayer card or something.
Yeah,
Like a prayer
the
card.
little card that has the dates and, well, they used to have more statistics on them. Now they have the date and a psalm or something.
Okay.
And people, you didn't collect them from a funeral unless you knew the person, usually.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it used to be a big thing to collect them. If Mom had a big box full of them,
Yeah.
she had a lot of friends, and that's nice to know. You don't have to write all their names, but it's nice to know that she had a lot of friends, and maybe you do want to keep track of all those names, because you never know who wrote a diary about your mother. Because it wasn't your mother, right? It was her best friend, right? And that's why we say you always want to research their friends, their associates, and their neighbors, because that's who's writing notes about you. You're not writing them yourself. No, you're too busy writing about your friends and who did what to who, and whatever, right? That's what you want to get. All right, so where are we going to look? We're going to start in our own house. Winter's coming. How many obituaries and funeral cards and anniversary clippings and party invitations do you have at home that have genealogical gold on them, but they've been sitting on the shelf because that's where you put them? Or that's where you put the box of Mom's stuff, right? I picked up my uncle died in 2016. I picked up, when we cleaned out their safe, all the funeral papers for my great-grandmother. Cards that looked as pristine as they did back in 1957 when she died. Nice bright colors and everything. I'm going through the cards with my aunt, and she's telling me who some of the people are, and I got to this one card, and they're like, sorry, we'll miss Dick's wedding. I mean, that's a really weird thing to write on a sympathy card, isn't it? Grandma died 5 days before my parents got married. Great-grandma. So it was like, but that little hint, I didn't really put that timeline together until I saw that little crazy thing on the card, sorry, we'll miss the wedding. Like, because I just thought that was the oddest thing. I read all these other things about, oh, we'll miss her, and whatever, and then sorry to miss. So sometimes you need those little hints. So go through them. You never know what you'll find. And again, ask your family members, what do they remember? Oh, I was writing things about Uncle George the other day. Do you have any stories about him? Again, get people talking. We all have recording devices in our pockets these days. Learn how to use them and just say, is it okay if I record this story so I don't forget it? Because I'm going to ask 400 other people at Christmas, whatever, the same questions. You forget the story. You'll mix them up. That's okay. Go to the historical societies. Go to libraries where they have yearbooks and they have, a local history room usually with town reports. You'd be surprised sometimes what you can find in town reports. I live in Upton. I went over to Mendon, right, because we do a lot of things together. I have some distant cousins that lived in Mendon up until the Civil War. Actually, were all born in Maine. They died in Maine, but they came down and they lived in Mendon for like 20 or 30 years. I said, it's just next door. I'll go see what I can find. I start looking at the town reports from the 1800s. The school board, every year, writes a report. Read them. In the 1800s, the biggest problem in schools was attendance. My cousin's children are in every one of those school reports for perfect attendance. 6, 8, 10 years old. They're in there for like 2 consecutive years. I wasn't looking for it because who researches a kid that's 6 years old? You don't expect to find anything unless you know they've had some accident or they've passed on or something, right? What I took from that was their parents cared about their education. The other side of that was their parents did not own a farm. They did not need the kids at home to work the farm. They made shoes and boots, and they sent their kids to school. But it says something about the parents' character that that's what they did. They didn't say, well, just because nobody else is going to school, you can stay home, They said, no, you go to school. So you never know what you can find in there. Somebody's ancestor made the metal gate that's at the cemetery and built the stone walls and all that kind of stuff and got paid by the citizens of the town to do that work. That's all in the town report. If you've never read a town report, it's time to read one, just so you can see what kind of things were in it. Talk to your town clerks, your town assessors. Maybe not this week for the town clerk, maybe not even next week for the town clerk. They need a break. My town clerk is all nervous about what if we get picked and we have to do the audit and recount all our votes and all this, which happens next week. So again, pay attention so you know when they're not busy. But talk to them and find out, what do they have for old tax bills? What do they have for old vital records? Tax bills can tell you a lot about the development of a property. These are all just kind of interesting places to go to. Don't forget that in Massachusetts, property deeds, they're online. They're a little hard to work with before 1950 or so, but they're there. I've read them back to the 1700s. You can get to them. You have to learn how. The deed books also include mortgages. You can learn where your ancestor got the money for their properties. Did they pay it off? We hope so. If not, maybe you still have a claim, who knows? Don't forget about probate records. Go to the probate court and see what you can learn. I have gone to the Worcester Probate Court and I have read wills that my ancestors wrote 300 years ago. I had to wait a week because in Worcester they don't store everything on site. You have to ask for it and then you have to wait. They go on Friday and they pick it up and they come back and they send you a little note that says your documents are here. and then you try to pick a day when they're not busy, right, to go in and look at them. But it's amazing what you can learn. Yes?
When did they, when did they require that property had to be documented, the transfer in deeds? Because in prior days, you could do it in your will, and that was the only record of property transfer. And I can't remember.
I
when.
don't know the date for that.
Because that's where if you're doing research on a property, you hit some blanks because it's been
in a
transferred
will.
by will and not by deed.
I've never heard that story before. I'll have to research that maybe next week. When
And I think
like,
it's sometime around the turn of this century, but it might have been a little earlier.
If your ancestor owned property, real property, like a house, piece of land, and died without a will, still go to probate.
That's where the transfer will be.
No. If they didn't have a will, I want you to go because somebody, think about this when you walk in your house tonight, somebody who knew the person, so again, there's a friend's signature at the bottom, got the job of walking through their entire property and writing down every single thing they owned. Every fork, knife, spoon, napkin, placemat, cooking pot, whatever. It's all written down on an inventory if they didn't have a will. Now think about how would you do that? Our high school students having heebie-jeebies back there like I could never do this, right? Walk in the front door and you write down everything you see and you go room by room around the first floor, then you go up the stairs and you do the second floor, and then you go outside and you do every outbuilding. Every single piece, every tool, every cart, every animal is written down. Not only is it written down, it tells you what it's worth at the time they did the inventory. And you will learn a lot of vocabulary that will make some great words for Scrabble and hangman and all those kind of things, and everybody will be looking at you like, what, that's really a word? Yeah, we're gonna look it up in the dictionary, I swear it's a word. Because you're gonna learn about the tools they had for whatever job they did, and those tools have had different names back then.
Are these called estate inventories, or do they have a name?
They're usually just called an inventory. And you can tell what it is because it might be scratchy, crappy writing to try and read, but it's somebody that was assigned and it said, you know, inventory of John Brown or whatever, and it will say, and you can usually get a feel. Like you can tell what rooms they were in by what they're listing, right? You only keep silverware in certain rooms and you only keep your linens in a certain room. So you get a feel for like, what was this person's house look like? How many outbuildings did they have? I'd rather have an inventory than a will any day, because you'll learn so much more. All right, so yes, remember those history classes where the social studies teacher would stand up and say, oh, it's time for your term paper. I always crossed my fingers behind my back and said, oh, please, 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 no bibliographies and footnotes. You know, they always wanted them. And now as a genealogist, I really want them. I want the footnotes and the bibliographies. I want to know, where did you find your information? I want to find out, oh, you got it from an interview? Well, who did you interview? How were they related to you? How old were they when you interviewed them? How did you look for it? Keep records, okay? People used different names, right? Sometimes because they had to, sometimes because, today I feel like being this name. If you look them up, right? Anybody ever read an obituary and then you go like, I didn't know that was their real name, right? You've always called the guy Buddy, and then you find out that his name is Harold. Well, what do you think is on his records? Do you think when you go to do his genealogy, he's under Buddy or is he under Harold? It doesn't matter which one you start with. There's going to be records under both. So you need to write down, I looked at this book, I looked for Harold, I didn't find him. There were lots of people with the same last name, but no Harold. Because when you then find out that he went by Buddy, now you need to go back to the same book and look him up. I have much regret that I did not mark all of this down when I went to go research my great-grandmother's, my great-grandmother's first husband. When he was in Maine, he was George Albert Anderson. But Monday through Friday, when he worked in Boston in the 1800s, explain this to me because I would not do it today, and he did it in the 1800s, he was Albert George Anderson in Boston. I don't know if that's because there were 500 George Andersons all working at the same place he was, or what the reason was, but everything he ever owned in Boston was under Albert, and everything he owned in New Hampshire, in Maine was under George. So you need to make these notes so that you can go back when you find these crazy names, or you find a new nickname or a new abbreviation, right? My grandson is William. Think of all the names you have to look up for William. William, W-M, Will, Bill, oh wait, W-M with a period. You know, I got a lot of research to do. If you don't mark down that you did every one of those, you're probably going to miss a record. And of course, read the footnotes and things because those are going to give you clues to go other places. So same for websites. Look at the websites for the historical, the state archives, Ellis Island. If you haven't gone and looked for your ancestors at Ellis Island in the last 10 years, I encourage you to go back. I'm going to say it was within the last 10 years that they did a big mea culpa and said, we found a lot of pages that we never scanned the backside. And I give them a ton of credit for saying it out loud and putting it out there. So if they weren't there before, they might be there now. I'm not guaranteeing, but you might as well look. It doesn't take that long. Archives.gov is the federal archives. Look those up. LOC, the Library of Congress. They have a wonderful genealogical section at the Library of Congress. You might not think they should or have a need for it, but they have it. I found my Swedish ancestors in a book in the Library of Congress because my cousin wrote it. And don't forget about your genealogical societies. I think I'm down to only belonging to 5 now, but I can't keep track. I belong to some that are geographic based, okay? We were talking about Massachusetts Society. I also belong to the Connecticut Society, the Maine Society of Genealogists. I also belong to some ethnic ones, so I belong to a Swedish group. Probably in about another 2 years, I'm gonna find a German group to join whenever I get around to doing my German line. So, you know, it's a great way to meet other people that are doing this, meet your cousins, and if it's ethnic-based or if it's religious-based or whatever, you know, you're going to get a lot more hints that way from other people that are researching the same kinds of things you are. How many hints did I give you today, Chris? 3, right? So far.
So how do you find those? So it's by geographic, ethnic, religion, topic, maybe even?
Yeah, I mean, some of them, sometimes it's going to be, you know, an association or a society like the Sons of Tavern Owners. Believe it or not, that's a society you can join.
I had a
Sons of Tavern
owner in my
Owner,
family,
you know.
so I didn't
Yeah, so, I mean, there's all kinds of things out there, and of course, we have the internet, so it's easy to just say, you know, oh, I want a genealogy society in Massachusetts. Well, I could name you off at least 10, I bet, in Massachusetts alone. Connecticut even has quite a few. Vermont, I think there's only the one, Genealogy Society of Vermont, because they didn't want to always be at the end alphabetically, so they got into the middle. So there are a lot of them out there, and some of them meet, you know, because of the pandemic, some of them only meet virtually, some of them meet hybrid. All these kind of things now you can do from home, so much of it. So try them out. Of course, we've got big websites to do research. I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock because they want us out of here in 5 minutes. FamilySearch.org is a 100% free site. In 15 years, they have never once sent me an email that I didn't ask for. So they do not hound you like some of the other ones that want your money for, you know, upgrade, do this, do that. The other 3 here, Ancestry, Find My Past, and My Heritage, all require a subscription. They all also have 14-day free trials. Just mark your calendar for day 13. Halfway through day 13, make sure you go in and cancel your free subscription. Because they will, day 14 in 1 minute, they will charge you. your credit card, and they're not real good to get your money back from them. And I don't mean to knock the library at all, but I looked at, they put some genealogy books out in the back. One of them is a guide to Ancestry. I looked at it, it's from 2018. Be aware, I'm sure it's still got some very valuable information in it, but be aware if you took the library book home that, we know how much websites change. And they change a lot more than every, 8 or 10 years. So be conscious of, if you're getting advice or information from a book on a website, that it's current. Even from the internet, if you look up things on the internet, make sure you're looking at a video that's fairly current, because if it's on software, you don't want the old directions. All right, let's see. Oh good, I think I'm almost done. So education, again, when you find out you've got that ancestor from Kansas, okay, what am I gonna do? Again, look for your societies. I'm sure there's a Kansas Society of Genealogists, or at least probably one in every county or something. Go down to the smallest geographical area that you think you're interested in and see what you can find, and then get wider and wider. Look for libraries that have genealogy groups. You don't have to go, but if they meet once a month and it's going to be like, oh, I can share my tips, I can get tips from other people. Their eyes don't glaze over when I start talking about great-grandma and her recipe book or whatever, because my kids' eyes glaze over at everything I talk about.
Shouldn't put a,
Come to the Historical Society. We like historical stuff. We do a conference I talked to a couple of you already about in New England. We have a group that's called the New England Regional Genealogical Consortium. And we put on a conference every 2 years to 18 months to 2 years, but it's always in the odd number years now. So our next one comes up in next October. It'll be in Manchester, New Hampshire. Before the pandemic, we would have 1,000 people there for 4 days. We give you plenty of classes to pick from to go to all day long. We have an exhibit hall. We have banquets, we do entertainment. I've met so many cousins there because we're all doing New England research, so, all I have to say is, oh yeah, my ancestors came from Lancaster, and these cousins come running out of, oh, you must be a Sawyer too, and we meet all these other people. Eastman's online newsletter, I really should update that one because he's now gone to Facebook. He doesn't do his newsletter by email anymore. He's been doing it since the day of early computers where you had bulletin boards. That's when he started his newsletter, because he was a computer geek at the time. I highly recommend, again, this would be a way to find out about societies and things. Sign up for the newsletter from Conference Keeper. It comes out once a week on the weekend, and it's free advertising, so everybody puts in it, we're having a meeting with this speaker, or we're having a conference with this speaker. You can find out what's going on. You can get all the names of the big top rock genealogists. There used to be a contest, name your rock star genealogist and whatever. And they even have job listings. If you want to get a job in the genealogy field, because I don't know who's going to hear this on the TV version here, they have job listings that you can look at doing things, some from home, some in libraries or whatever. Legacy Family Tree does webinars. They're usually Wednesdays or Fridays, and they're free. You can log in on either Wednesday or Friday, whatever day they have them. It's usually at 2 o'clock. They have room for up to 1,000 people when they do them live. The first week, the recording is free. You can listen to it as many times as you want for free. After a week, you have to have a subscription. And I'm pretty sure their semi-annual sale is coming up. Their subscription for a year is $50. They usually put it on sale for $25. And they have 1,500 webinars, all with handouts, or at least most of them with handouts. So if you have a subscription, you can not only listen, but you can download the handouts as many times as you want for as long as your subscription lasts. So it's a great place. Even if you just go look at the library to say, do they have anything on Kansas, and see what they have, or whatever it is you need. But check it out. And don't forget that all the the big research sites also have educational aspects. Usually you don't need a subscription to do their educational stuff because of course they're hoping, oh, if you take a couple of our videos or watch our videos, you know, then you'll come back to us to do your research. Okay, whew, I finished. Just barely on time.
Thank you very much.
But are there more questions?
One
Yeah.
site you didn't mention was cemetery search. Do you find that helpful to find where your ancestors are buried? It seems to be consumer driven.
Find a grave.
Like find a grave or
Find a
billion graves?
Yeah.
I have found some to be helpful. You need to be very cautious because a lot of the people who put those up have no relation to the person. So again, anything you find online, it's a clue. Unless it's documented as to where the information came from, it's a clue. It's not a fact. It's not a fact until you can say, I found it in this document. And actually, I will make myself a note to add to this. If you do want to do some research online, not specific to cemeteries, but one of the places that you can build a tree online, it's not a research site per se, at least it's not booked that way, is called WikiTree, W-I-K-I-T-R-E-E. One of the reasons that I would mention them and recommend them as a place to look is that they are very, very stringent about requiring your sources. So use it even as a research site, knowing you're never going to find somebody's, well, I shouldn't say never, but you're not going there to look for birth certificates, okay? But go in and put in grandpa's name or great-grandpa's name and see what other people have and what their sources are. Because if you're using something like Ancestry or Family Search, where they don't really push you to put your sources in, you don't know where these people got the information. And you will find, the more of these sites you go to, you will find people who have your ancestors in their tree with all the wrong information. Don't yell at them. They copied it from somebody else. Guarantee, you know, we'll never find patient zero, as they say, who originally put it in. If you want to work with them and say, hey, you know, this is my family, I know this about them, because it could be their grandmother's brother-in-law's mother-in-law, and they copied it, and they don't care what they copied. So don't hesitate if you want to reach out, but be aware you might get into a battle over, well, I read it in this book, and you read it in that book, and the two books don't agree, and somebody's going to have to do the research to figure out which book is more accurate. And that's what we're going for. We want accuracy. The best accuracy that you can do with your own liabilities and restrictions. And if that means all you can do is do your research on the computer because you need things from Germany and you're not going to travel to Germany, then so be it. You do the best you can do on the computer. If your family grew up in Westborough for years and you can go to the town hall and the libraries and all of this stuff and talk to older citizens here, go for it. But just do the best you can do. That's all we're asking. No perfection required. And I can see they're starting to turn off the lights. So.
Thank you.
I have one more question around,
Okay.
you mentioned Germany, and I have a lot of German relatives. So Ancestry, you can buy the package to get Europe, but all the records are in German. So is there any other tips to find records from another country?
Okay, I will approach that this way. Rather than looking for other ways to get the records, there is an association of professional genealogists. It's an international group. I'm making myself a note to add WikiTree.
And they will help you when, or are they fee for service?
Their website is apgen.org. And they have a wonderful directory where you can go in and say, I need somebody who's an expert in German. And it will show you everybody who's listed that in their profile and whether they do translations or they do on-site research or, you know, whatever, so that you can start a conversation. And I always say, you know, these are people that are professionals, right? And yes, I treat it like the old ice cream shop when you could go in and say, I'd like a taste of that flavor and, you know, it always tasted better on the little plastic spoons, right? They're most likely, if you write them a courteous note, an email, they're gonna send you back a website that said, you know, like my example, if you just write and say, I just found out I have German ancestry, I don't know what to do to start. They'll write you back. If my brain was working a little more, I'd tell you exactly what the website is they would recommend you start with. And I probably could guarantee that certainly any of the ones I've met, behind their back, their fingers are crossed, that when you get stuck, you'll write back and hire them. Okay? It's like asking, you know, the old days when you could actually ask a doctor at a party, I've had this ache, you know, can you give me an idea? And they'd at least say, go home and take Tylenol versus Advil, or, you know, whatever it was they would tell you. Right. Now you can't do that.
I wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight. I would like to encourage everybody to vote, whatever way you're going to.
That's
But
right, we
as
don't
a-
care how you vote, we only care
But
that you
as
vote.
a historical society and looking around, be glad the women have the vote. I actually have a women's suffrage program that was given in our town hall not that long ago. So go vote, women.